Cabinet colleagues, excellencies and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. This year marks Singapore's 60th year of independence. Back in 1965, few believed that we would make it. We were a small city-state with no natural resources, no hinterland, no means of defense. The odds were stacked against us. But step by step, we defied expectations. We overcame challenges and built the Singapore today as a vibrant, modern, and globally respected nation. So this SG 60 year is really a time for us to reflect, to look back on how far we have come, and importantly, to look ahead and chart the way forward in a rapidly changing world. To understand our journey, we must first understand the global environment in which our nation was forged. Singapore's success did not happen in a vacuum. For much of the past 60 years, we thrived in a post-World War II rules-based international order, one that was shaped and underwritten by American leadership. After the Second World War, the U.S. took an extraordinary approach for a victorious power. It supported decolonization, paving the way for the independence of many nations in Africa and Asia. It helped to rebuild the economies of its defeated enemies, Germany and Japan, and it launched the Marshall Plan to help Western Europe get back on its feet. It established global institutions like the United Nations, the IMF, and the World Bank, and GATT, and later on the WTO. It championed free trade and open markets. All this promoted an international system of rules and norms that enabled global cooperation. It created space for smaller nations like Singapore to participate meaningfully in world affairs and to benefit from global trade and development. America pursued these efforts out of its own enlightened self-interest. Because having been dragged into 2 world wars, it was determined to prevent another global conflict. And it believed that applying its power to uphold such a global order, it could foster peace and prosperity, not just for the world, but also for itself. During the Cold War, the U.S. took decisive steps to stem the tide of communism. Its intervention in Vietnam gave Southeast Asia and Singapore the time and space we needed to develop and grow. The Vietnam War remains controversial, and so what we say about it may not be universally accepted, even in America itself. But Singapore is profoundly grateful for the tremendous sacrifices the U.S. made intervening in Indochina at that time. Then, when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the U.S. stood alone as a sole superpower. Its leadership and security umbrella maintained peace and stability in Asia and created an environment in which countries like Singapore could flourish and thrive. Of course, things were not perfect. From time to time, America was criticized for double standards and inconsistency. But by and large, it remained a force for stability and a force for good. It is in this international context that Singapore took flight. Back in 1972, Mr. Rajaratnam envisioned Singapore as a global city, one that would, quote, draw sustenance not only from the region, but also from the international economic system. This vision flourished because of the global environment of cooperation, rules, and stability, and because Singapore chose to plug into this global system. Today, very unfortunately, this international order is fraying. The conditions that sustain it no longer hold. Within America, support for global engagement has declined. Many Americans feel left behind by globalization. Their communities have suffered job losses, stagnant wages, and social dislocation. There is a growing sense that other countries are benefiting disproportionately from America's security umbrella and access to its markets while contributing little in return. The long and costly wars in Afghanistan and Iraq after 9/11 have deepened public wariness towards foreign entanglements. And the shocks from the global financial crisis of 2008 and the COVID pandemic have caused further disruptions and dislocations. So there is now a strong and growing impulse within America to turn inward, to focus on its own domestic priorities and to scale back costly overseas commitments. This shift is evident under the current American administration. The U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio himself highlighted that the unique role of the U.S. was an, quote, anomaly and a product of the end of the Cold War. It was an anomaly and a product of the end of the Cold War. But this sentiment is not limited to one party alone. It reflects deeper structural changes in American society, that the U.S. can no longer afford to lead the world in resolving every problem. And it now needs to cut back on what it does abroad. So this may not just be a temporary change in policy. This could reflect the new normal in the U.S. for some time to come. At the same time, China has emerged as a near-peer competitor of the U.S. China has benefited immensely from this U.S.-led order. And today, a new generation of Chinese, raised in an era of rapid growth and national revival, believe that the East is rising and the West is declining. They are also more assertive, determined to correct the perceived humiliations of the past and to secure what they see as China's rightful place in the world. America and China are now locked in a fierce contest for global supremacy. Neither country wants open conflict, but there is deep mistrust and suspicion on both sides. Miscalculations, especially over flashpoints like Taiwan, could trigger a broader and more dangerous escalation. Both powers claim they do not wish to force countries to choose sides. But in reality, each seeks to draw others closer into their respective orbits. This rivalry is already reshaping our world and will continue to define the geopolitical landscape for years to come. So we are in the midst of a messy transition globally. To what? Nobody can tell. America is stepping back from its traditional role as the guarantor of order and the world's policeman. But neither China nor any other country is willing or able to fill the vacuum. So nations are turning inward, prioritizing their own narrow interests. The once rising tide of global cooperation that defined the past decades is giving way to one of growing competition and distrust. And as a result, the world is becoming more fragmented and disorderly. Amidst these geopolitical realities, countries everywhere are re-examining their strategic assumptions and recalibrating their policies. In Europe, many were surprised by America's ambiguity on security guarantees for Ukraine and NATO and its uneven treatment of allies and partners. There is palpable anxiety over reliance on U.S. military support, and European countries are fundamentally rethinking their defense postures. France has raised the idea of extending its nuclear umbrella to other European partners, for example. Poland has expressed interest in acquiring access to nuclear weapons, and Germany's Bundestag has voted to exempt defense spending from its fiscal rules. These are not minor shifts. They reflect a deeper and more fundamental realization in Europe that the post-Cold War peace dividend is over, and Europe must now reinvest in its own defense and resilience. In Asia, these developments are being watched just as closely. The former Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida once warned that Ukraine today may be East Asia tomorrow. That warning carries greater weight and urgency today. The abrupt recalibration in American support for Europe has prompted Asian countries to question the durability of America's commitment to the region. In his first trip to Asia, the U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth sought to reassure regional partners. He said, and I quote, "America first does not mean America alone," and that the U.S. would prioritize and shift to Asia in a way that is unprecedented and establish the deterrence necessary to prevent war. Even so, countries will take steps to strengthen their own capabilities, just in case help does not arrive in time. They will remember that President Obama once declared that U.S. was rebalancing towards Asia, but this stance was not sustained in subsequent U.S. administrations. So that's why in both Japan and South Korea, public debate over defense has intensified. There are calls to bolster deterrence, including through enhanced missile and air defenses, and even discussions once considered taboo about acquiring nuclear weapons. What was once unthinkable is now openly contemplated. So all this marks a major psychological shift across the region. And if these trends persist, it could reshape Asia's strategic balance in fundamental ways, leading to heightened military buildup, riskier deterrence postures, and a more brittle regional security environment. Alongside growing geopolitical unease, we are seeing growing turbulence in the international economic system. There is a well-known adage in international economics about the trilemma between economic interdependence, economic security, and geopolitical competition. Only two can coexist at the same time, but not all three. So after the end of the Cold War, geopolitical tensions subsided. Hence, countries could embrace interdependence while maintaining a broad sense of economic security. Today, geopolitical competition has returned with a vengeance. The major powers no longer feel economically secure. So something's got to give. And where economic interdependence was once seen as a virtue, it is now seen as a vulnerability. And therefore, governments are responding by localizing production, building up self-sufficiency, and reasserting greater control over critical supply chains and strategic industries. Economic instruments like tariffs, export controls, and sanctions are being used not for market purposes, but as instruments of statecraft to advance national interest. Well, these trends are not new, but they have reached a new intensity with the latest U.S. tariff moves. The U.S. has since postponed most of its reciprocal tariffs, but there is little comfort in this, because the current baseline tariff rates are still much higher than what they used to be, and the changes have already caused great uncertainty for businesses everywhere. No company can comfortably plan long-term investments while knowing that the tariff rates could be changed at a moment's notice. Moreover, the U.S. and China are entering a full-blown tariff trade war. The U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods are now 145%, and China has responded, as all of you know, with tariffs on U.S. goods at 125% and vowed to fight to the end. At these rates, trading between the two countries will just grind to a halt, and the pain will be felt not just by them, but by countries everywhere. For now, neither side wants to back down. There are no obvious off-ramps, no easy paths to de-escalate. and the deterioration of trade ties will accelerate the decoupling of the two economies. What we are witnessing is the remaking of the global economy not as one integrated system, but increasingly as bifurcated ecosystems centered around America and China. And as economic ties fray, other aspects of the US-China relationship will come under greater strain. Trust will erode further. Tensions will rise across multiple domains. I've just shared what I think is sobering but a realistic assessment of our concerns happening globally. For a small, open economy like Singapore, these global developments are deeply worrying. Our prosperity has depended on a stable, rules-based global order and the free flow of trade, capital, people, and ideas. As the old order frays, a new one will eventually emerge. It is likely to be more multipolar, less coordinated, and more contested. It will not be shaped by the grand designs of a single superpower, nor by a harmonious concord of all the major powers, but more by the actions and choices of many different players. And despite our limitations as a small state, we cannot afford to be a passive bystander in this evolving landscape. Instead, we must respond with agility and resolve and actively shape our own destiny. And Singapore today is not without agency. We are better resourced, more capable, more connected than we were in 1965. We have forged strong friendships around the world. The Singapore brand is well regarded, and we enjoy a deep reservoir of international goodwill. More importantly, we are not alone. There are many like-minded countries that share our commitment to an open, stable, and rules-based global system. So we can and we will deepen and expand our networks with them. And together, we can preserve the multilateral frameworks that matter and lay the groundwork now for a more stable global order that can emerge in the years ahead.